President Trump was elected with majority support from the evangelical Christian community. Now, 1 year after Trump took office, Rahema Ellis went to Iowa to talk with some evangelical voters to see if they believe the president has fulfilled his campaign promises. And we are having some audio issues. We apologize for that. But let's talk about the crux of what this package is going to say, which is that largely they're feeling pretty good about where things stand right now. A lot of people elected President Trump because they thought he was going to get things done. Let me read you something. This was a compilation of editorials that the New York Times pulled together, and I think it really underscores how a lot of people who voted for President Trump feel, which is President Trump has exceeded my wildest expectations. Yes, he is embarrassing. Yes, he picks unnecessary fights. I love George W. Bush, but he failed on policy over and over again. If it takes putting up with Mr. Trump's brash ways to see things get done, that is a deal I'm willing to accept. Alexia, is that your sense that Trump voters, whether they were Republicans, Democrats, or independents, are looking at this first year and saying, you know what, there are some wins on the board?
Yeah, something I love doing is talking to Democratic senators who represent red states and saying, like, what are these Trump voters saying when you go back home? And they say this exact same thing. Steel workers, coal miners are like, we're going to get our jobs back. He's going to bring back coal mining jobs because he says he will, and he does what he says. That said, they still think he's embarrassing, but that's not changing their vote. So they really do believe what he says, and I think it's because he just harps on these points over and over and over again, and they're like, well, he's going to do what he says. He's a businessman.
Alexi points to, I think, such an interesting point, which is that the president will tweet. We spend a lot of time talking about it, and yet the reality is, for the people who support him, and maybe some of the people who didn't, they're not necessarily focused on that. They want to see action in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what the president was able to accomplish last year, and a lot of this happened in December, that between the tax legislation, repealing the individual mandate as part of that, the broader deregulatory agenda that his administration has carried out, sort of at every level, and then the changing tone from the White House and the president, that has had an impact, and it's having an impact. We might often, we all find ourselves sometimes chasing the shiny object of the day, the latest tweet, and sometimes the president, maybe more people would be talking about it. And some of the recent polls show, people view the economy as doing much better than it was a year ago, but they're not quite saying the same thing about their country more broadly, maybe because the president hasn't been able to get out of his own way. When it's Apple jobs coming back, things like that. People aren't seeing that.
And the frustration, though, is real when there's a potential government shutdown. All right, we did get that piece queued up, so let's roll it now. Rahema Ellis.
Has the president lived up to your expectation?
Yeah, kind of broken into categories. I would say character and policy. I think he's doing really well in policy, but the character is an issue at times.
What has he done in character that's disappointed you?
For instance, what was said in the office, supposedly in the Oval Office last week about other nations, that is contrary to what Christ would stand for in the Bible and what Christians would be about.
I think that there's a lot of frustration both with him and with the press. A lot of sense of people are at the point where they just are beginning to not care.
Relationship matters, and if everybody who disagrees with him walks away from him, then we just lost our voice too, and that's not wise.
Let's talk specifically about DACA. And if there are people in your community who have concerns about what the president's position is on DACA.
There is a misnomer that this president is out to go into neighborhoods and tear families apart. So in my vocation, I have to be able to say, look, we're here to offer hope. I can't break the law. I can't use my church as a sanctuary church, but then I'm torn because I'm looking at families with the potential of being ripped apart. It's a real difficult place to be. I think we need more conversation around it.
If you had an opportunity to speak to the president, what would you say to the president?
I would appeal to his vanity. I would tell him, you're not serving your ego well. Go outside of the Beltway, do more rallies, connect more with actual everyday people, the people that put you in the White House. What is it you want them to pressure weak Republican leadership in Congress to do this year?
What do you believe that the faith community would like to see from the president going forward?
I think what we'd like to see is religious liberty with some real teeth to it, some real legislation behind it.
What does that mean?
That means that if I own a venue and I believe marriage is between one man and one woman, and a gay couple says, I want to get married here, my gay wedding, at your venue. And that owner says, not at this venue, because we don't celebrate that.
I'd love to see states say, you know what, we're going to criminalize abortion, and we're going to stop this murdering of unborn people.
What would you like the president to do?
I would like him to follow the Word of God. There is an answer in the Bible for every issue. And if he just follows that, we will be blessed, and that we can be a blessing to others.
What a fascinating conversation. Alexi, I want to just get your broad reaction. And one of the panelists said that he wants to see the president connect with people more in the coming year. I thought that was interesting.
It is interesting, especially when we consider the messaging from the tax plan, that this was a middle-class miracle. That was his attempt to speak to these folks that man was just saying elected him to office. But I think it suggests, even though they're still supporting him, they're slowly starting to realize, like, hey, maybe this guy doesn't represent our best interests and is doing everything in his power and with Republican leaders in Congress to help make our lives better.
All right, guys, thanks. Stick around.